And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Bubba on the BatFlip, episode 99. Oh, so close to Mr. 100. Thanks for listening to us once again tonight as we recap our trip to FPAZ and, more importantly, the draft and hold that we took part in the first 23 rounds to get ready for the 2022 season, because it was wild. There was a lot of interesting things that took place in that draft. So we'll talk about that and recap that for a little while. Take some awesome listener questions as we start prepping for 2022. You can find myself on Twitter at BDentric and my co-host, as always, on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. Toby, how we doing, man?
Bubba, we are doing well. Thank you. It was great to hang out with you at First Pitch Arizona. I almost totally forgot that our next episode is episode 100, which is really exciting. So cool. That's awesome. But yeah, First Pitch Arizona was great. It was awesome to hang out with everybody, see a little baseball, do some drafting, and just get a chance to meet people. I mean, I had been once before and had an opportunity to meet some folks before, which was really nice to see them again. But getting to meet new people and hanging out with people like yourself, and watching the playoffs was a lot of fun. So,
yeah, it was great hanging out with you. A little Bubba on the BatFlip time was always good. And then, so many awesome people, like right into the game with Miles and Nick the first day. And then, hanging out with all the guys for the game the second night, the Joey Weimer game. That was something else. And then just the little things in between, like you said, meeting people, poker nights, and it was cool just seeing the industry, and hopefully more and more people can come out as maybe things get a little better, hopefully next year, and safety's better and so on and so forth. So I hope that more people want to go and can go, because this is my first year. Toby said now it's his second, and I'm going to try my darndest to go every time. Like, there's going to be years where I just can't, and it's feasibly not possible. But between just baseball in general, it was great. And then the people and the fantasy baseball, it was a great 3 or 4 days. So highly recommend it to anybody out there that can pull it off. It's not for everybody. I get it. But if you can, it's awesome. So I would definitely check that out. But we'll get into our draft here in a second. I guess what I'll say, was there any takeaways from anything you heard, or just conversations for either looking back on 2021 or looking ahead to 2022 that kind of stood out with you, thinking wow, I didn't think of that, or people on the same page as me? Because there was a lot of small discussions kind of outside the main discussions from time to time. We're that's interesting. Never thought of it that way.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I didn't know about Joey Weimer before our trip.
The legend.
For those who weren't following on Twitter, Joey Weimer is a prospect in the Brewers system. And it was interesting because even during the panel to kick it off, there was some discussion on prospects, and some folks mentioned, Joey Weimer is kind of an under the radar guy who has, kind of
the freak factor.
The freak factor. Exactly. And so we didn't know what we were in for, but then we went to the game, and one of the teams was just absolutely stacked. It was Joe Gray from the Brewers, followed by Beatty or Batty from the Mets, who, according to a lot of people, I'm wearing my Mets hat today, was the best player that they've seen so far in the Arizona Fall League. And then after that, it was Spencer Torkelson. Then after that, it was Weimer, and then Tolio from the Rockies, who hit a bomb, and Tovar, I think, as well. So just a bunch of really elite prospects all on one team, or not super elite, but recognizable. But Weimer just crushed it from the get-go. So we kind of went in with this knowing about kind of the freak factor that he has. And dude's got this long blonde mullet, just, party, as Bubba told me, this guy's party all the time. Yeah. But just, high energy guy. I mentioned he reminded me a little bit of Eric Burns, but he started off the game with an opposite field home run that was 108 miles per hour exit velocity. The following inning, he threw a guy out at third base from right field with just an absolute cannon. The next time he's up, I think he got hit by a pitch, or it was either that time he got hit by a pitch or walked, ended up scoring. And just everybody in the ballpark, just the energy that he was bringing and the party that he represented, everybody was getting behind him. So he'd come up and just random pockets of the audience, since there wasn't a ton of people there, were just shouting his name. And it was a lot of fun. That was a great game. It was nice to sit, next to everybody and kind of catch up with Ryan Bloomfield and meet some new folks like Jesse, you know, who is an NHL fantasy person, but also a baseball fantasy person. So yeah, that was kind of a highlight for me. But I don't know, what were some takeaways from you, or any recollections from that game in particular you wanted to share?
Well, that game particularly, like you said, it was just the different players, like the freak factor. We're sitting there and you see him just jogging in as he's getting loose before the game, and the hair is bouncing. We're like, oh my gosh, like here it is. And that was something that stood out in a big way. But that game, I guess if I could point out a negative factor, the pitch clocks that make it an automatic ball or an automatic strike got out of hand real quick. That was something like because in the fall league, for those that didn't know, they're testing out the 15-second pitch clock, and it was to a T. Like if it was the batter's fault, it was a ball or a strike. If it was the pitcher's fault, it was a ball. Spencer Torkelson struck out on his first at bat because the pitcher's the clock. They were enforcing balks more. The pitcher got called on a timed a ball and then a balk following that because you can't step off the bag, I think, more than once or something. So that was weird. They're using bigger bases. That was kind of fun, but you couldn't do the shift. You had to have at least 2 guys on each side of the infield. That was interesting. So
I didn't notice all these things. You're so perceptive. Yeah. Like,
well, I noticed the shift, especially the first game. That game in Surprise, I noticed it big time because you'd see we were sitting on the right field, the first baseline to start the game. The shortstop would be literally like a half a foot to the left of the bag. He'd get all the way over and stop, and like they do that all the time, and then they kind of move around again. So there's some other rules, I believe, but it was interesting to see the biggest ones that timer. Oh, and the automated umpire in Scottsdale, because we were kind of wondering, you could see the ball would get there, take like 2 seconds, he'd make his call. So he had like a buzzer in his ear or something. So that was another one. So it was interesting. It's a lot of walks, lots of walks.
Oh, we saw
they called the game early.
Had 22 walks.
They called the game early because Mesa ran out of pitchers.
Yeah, and that was the second game of like the 5 that we had tickets that we could have gone to that had 22 walks.
Yeah.
In the game, it was, the pitching was pretty ugly, but there was some really nice hitting performances that we got to see for sure.
And if I had to like pick any one thing, I can't like nothing in particular, but it was just really cool. The side sessions, like when we rode with Nick Pollock and Miles, and then Nick talking about the way he breaks down pitching, just kind of getting the one-on-one and how he looked at certain guys. Like we were talking like Logan Webb, and then we were talking Robbie Ray, and we were talking just different guys and why he thinks this and that. And you know, you can agree or disagree, but you got to at least admit he's one of the better guys when it comes to pitching. So it was pretty cool to listen to him break it down. And then just like the different podcast sections, there's just a lot of cool stuff. I could go on and on about all of it, but go. That's the one thing I'd say is go if you can. It's pretty darn cool. Just the camaraderie, if anything. Like the second night, we're in the side session of the bar watching the game, and Toby and Govier are playing video games like NHL 94 on Govier's computer.
Yeah,
another crew another crew in the corner talking about like college football. Like there's just little things going on the whole time. It was just cool to see the whole thing take place. So.
For sure. And anybody wondering how that went, Govier crushed me. I mean, 5-0. It was Red Wings against the Maple Leafs from 1993. Just absolutely destroyed me. It was brutal. It was brutal.
Then like I saw the old school Nintendo RBI game come up or something. There were just all kinds of things. It was hilarious what Govier had going on over there. But that's Govier. And if anybody's curious, who you see on the internet is who you get in real life. He is the legit real deal. He's a great guy, like an amazing human being. But that is legit Michael Govier. So enjoy that. But let's get into it. Draft and hold took place on the Saturday. There's 4 drafts going on. There's a draft and hold. There's a best ball. There was a auction, and there was, I believe, a score sheet took place. So a bunch of drafts going on. We were in the draft and hold 15 team with Dave McDonald, Jorge Montanez, Curlin, Simeone, Sporer, Mason. I want to say that was all the analysts, and then a lot of great like
Alan from Baseball HQ.
Yes,
was part of it as well.
Yes, okay. Alan was in there, and then there was some great listeners, and just that's the beauty of it. It's not all analysts that go to this thing. There's just great fantasy people. So, like, the guys sitting next to me, they listen to our show. They love our show. Like, so they were just sitting there talking to us the whole time. And just a lot of great people. And I'm horrible with names, so I don't remember many names at all. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun kind of seeing where the ADP would kind of start, because they gave us a sheet, Toby, from the first draft that took place that Zola and some guys did. And I don't know about you, but some of those teams don't know what they were thinking when they were drafting. That's all I just going over. That was rough. So,
yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting experiment because I've done this draft and hold once before at First Pitch Arizona. we do 23 rounds live in Arizona, and then later on this winter we'll do the last 27 rounds to fill out our rosters. But the last time I was there, I think steamer projections were already out, or there was some form of projections that I could rely on, but there just wasn't anything available, right then. Like the steamer 600, obviously there are problems with that because Terrence Gore is the highest rated player because he's projected to steal like 300 bases. There's problems with that. And then the ones for the rest of the season, or, don't have enough plate appearances. And so you could get there, but you just needed to do a little bit more work than I was prepared to do. Yeah. So it was fascinating because we had that sheet of ADP. And as you mentioned, I mean, everybody's doing their best, right? And we could be totally off on it, but there was definitely some surprises in terms of where different players were going. And I felt like, the results from our draft are maybe a little bit more indicative of what we're going to see as we get closer to drafts in March, though obviously there will be a variety of different changes there. So we have that list. I threw in steamer 600 just to see if I could identify places where maybe there were some guys who were undervalued just from a skills perspective, but I really wasn't going off of much except for that. And then I also had some ADP from some other drafts that had been run that I had seen online and kind of uploaded into Google Sheets. So that provided a little bit of a guide for me, but really you were flying by the seat of your pants, and I think that a lot of us were in a similar situation. I think compared to a lot of people, I had done a little bit more work than others. So, but yeah, it was fascinating. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, I legit was with a group of guys that during lunch, I got up from the table. I went into the main lobby of the hotel where they had a printer and a computer, and I just printed out like the top 500 players in the Razzball Player Rater because I just wanted a list of players because I didn't know they were going to give us a sheet. So I just needed a list of players to like have an idea in my head. And they gave us a sheet, and that was pretty much all I was going off of because I took a break once the season ended. I hadn't really started much anything. So it was kind of in my head, this is where I'm at. And, luckily I drafted 9th. You were 11th, I believe, right? 11th? Yeah. So it was kind of in the middle, so I could kind of take a pick and then kind of see where I was going and kind of plan for a little bit and go back and forth where I didn't have to go bang, bang or whatever, or reach or something like that. So it was still just weird because we're going to look back on this draft. At least I am. I already know because we're going to talk about it here very, very shortly. But there's certain players. I'm like, how did that fall? And then we're going to look back and I'm going to be like, that's why they fell. And I'm like, okay, now it makes sense. But we'll see. It was very, very interesting. The one takeaway I have already is starting pitching is insanely deep right now. Now that could totally change in March, but right now, as we stand, I think it's ridiculously deep. But any positions or anything that stood out to you before we dig into this?
No, I mean, I think I agree in the sense that it seems like starting pitching is deeper than hitting, at least at the beginning of the drafts. That was kind of the experience, although our draft was fairly unique in the sense that, I was drafting 11 and I got the first starting pitcher. Yeah. So I think as we get closer to March, I don't think that same thing is going to happen, right? When we have some answers to questions like, is Jacob deGrom healthy? Or does he appear healthy? Is he throwing in spring training? How does he look there? So it was interesting in that respect for me. And I kind of went with a standard approach, not because I even went in. I didn't go in wanting to do that. Actually, I went in wanting to draft a hitter first and kind of see how my team could build that way, because I like kind of the 3rd and 4th round pitchers. But the way the draft felt to me, I felt like I needed to take a couple guys in spots that ended up being, kind of my traditional build in a lot of ways. So,
yeah, no, I'm with you. Well, so let's get into it. We won't go over every pick. Like, I'll just name off the ones that went. Then we'll go over each of our picks, kind of give an explanation. If anything stood out before or after those picks, we can discuss them. And we'll do this for about 45 minutes or so and just kind of get a good idea of where things stood. But the draft started off, Dave McDonald was 1. He took Trey Turner, then went Tatis, Soto, Bichette, Acuna at 5. And then, bear with me because the fuzzy picture everybody loves, it's I'm trying to read, and it's not the easiest. So I might screw some things up. Like I can't tell who.
Totally. And I just had my son just poked his head in the back there. I don't know if you saw that, but
I can't. I'm trying to read the screen.
He's supposed to be sleeping. I'm flying solo tonight. I had the kids down, but apparently that is not the case anymore.
I don't know who was after Acuna. I apologize, people. Oh, it was he's a third baseman. I can't remember. And then it went Ohtani, J-Ram went 8. I was sitting there next to Michael Simeon because he was picking 10th. Toby was sitting behind me, and I'm sitting there going, if J-Ram falls to 9, I'm going to be doing cartwheels. Like, this is going to be amazing. J-Ram goes at 8, so I kick off my draft with Mookie Betts. And this was a tough one for me, and I'll explain why in a second. But I love Mookie Betts. We've talked about him on the show. Going to probably be leading off for the Dodgers next year, if not hit like second for the Dodgers. Like, one of the best positions he can possibly be in all of baseball. He's going to run. He's going to hit homers. He's going to score runs, drive him. He's going to do it all. Five categories through the roof. Not much goes wrong there. He was a little banged up this year, which is a bit disturbing as he gets older, but I think we can still rely on Mookie Betts to be great. I will say I was very torn on him and Kyle Tucker. Very, very torn. Because I love what Kyle Tucker did this year with 30 home runs, 14 stolen bases, nearly hit 300. All the stuff you can think of. Correa probably leaving town. Tucker will move up in the order potentially, most likely, which could just up the counting stats, and he could have just a monster season. I was very, very close to going Kyle Tucker, but I took Mookie Betts. That's what we're living with, and I don't mind it. But I legit was already like, this is where we were in this early draft, thinking, okay, maybe if I prepped more, I might have taken Kyle Tucker. But I'm sitting there going, Mookie Betts, reliable, we're good, yes. But I'm already having second thoughts right out the gate. But that's where I stood with my first pick. After that, it went Bryce Harper by Simeon, and then you had the pick at number 11.
Yeah, I had the pick at number 11, and I was very pleased to have Garrett Cole fall to me there. You know, Garrett Cole in the drafts I've seen has gone anywhere, I think, from as high as number 3, I want to say, and as low as 11. But for me, I have to dive in a little bit deeper. But for me, he's my SP1 at this point in time. I know that he struggled towards the end of the season. He really struggles against the Red Sox. I mean, let's be honest. Like, that's kind of been his Achilles heel during his time with the Yankees, which is unfortunate given they play the Red Sox quite a few times. But when you look at Garrett Cole, you know, if you look at the underlying skills, so over his last 10 games, you know, his in-zone contact rate was at 78%, which is elite. That's the same as his 3-year average. So very, very good. His O swing was at 35%, which again is right at his 3-year average. If you look at his strikeout rate, it was at 32.2%, slightly below his 3-year average, but again, an elite number. You look at his swinging strike rate, it was at 15%, right in line with his 3-year average. And then his walk rate was down at 6.3%, so right in line with his 3-year average. That's a 26% K minus walk rate. So the skills are there. They're very similar to what they've been in the past. And whether or not in real drafts. So just to give you a sense, over his last 10 games, his BABIP was 348, which is the highest it's been over any 3-year period. You know, again, this was after, you know, the sticky stuff was gone, but the skills were the same. I'm not sure why the batted ball skills would change all that much. So really, you know, there was a lot of BABIP that was resulting in runners getting on base and runners scoring. I'm going to just check his strand rate really quickly to see what it was at. And his strand rate was down at 70%, which again is right about his lowest mark in the last 3 years. So essentially he had the unluckiest 10 game period in terms of BABIP and strand rate. All the other skills were the same. So I think you're drafting the same guy that was an elite pitcher this year, who's going to get you the volume, who's going to give you the strikeouts, who's on a good team and should get a decent amount of wins, especially if the Yankees make some changes and upgrades, you know, this year on that offense, which I think performed about as bad as it could have. You know, if you think about the various players on that team, Torres underperformed, LeMahieu underperformed, Sanchez, at least in the second half of the season, underperformed. You know, Judge maybe was the one guy who lived up to the hype, and maybe Stanton as well. But just a lot of struggles overall, I think. And so hopefully not hopefully because I don't like the Yankees, but I think they'll be a little bit better next year. And so I like Cole a lot right there in that spot, but I can see why people would go in other directions. I also wanted J-Ram, which apparently at 11 is not going to happen this year. No.
No, I even did on Monday night, I recorded the Tool Shed podcast with Chris Clegg and Eric Cross, and then Dave McDonald's and Baseball Pods. Chris was on there. So 5 of us did the first 30 picks. We just kept going, rotating through. And J-Ram was very popular in that crew as well. So he's not going deep in this. Like, people are realizing just how good he is, I think. So that ship has sailed, but I like the Garrett Cole call. The floor is great. You can't go wrong there. If you don't go ceiling, I can see arguments elsewhere, but floor, tough to beat. After Cole, you had Freddie Freeman. Kyle Tucker went at 13. That stung a bit. That went to Paul Sporer, of all people. And then Corbin Burns and Cedric Mullins as Justin Mason stays on brand and takes a set at the end of round 1. Let's talk about that real quick, Toby. I took him towards the end of round 2 in the mock draft I did Monday night, and I think I picked 26. I don't mind that because even on paper, even if he has a regression, which he probably, he went 30-30. Like, let's be real, probably has more like 20 to 25 homer per hour potentially, but the steals, he could probably steal more for all we know. I think he at least brings like a 20-20 floor potentially in there. Who knows? And that allows him to be a very high pick. I don't know if I can go first round, though. How high would you be willing to go with Cedric Mullins? I know you go pitching early, so it's probably not going to happen anyways. But if you were, per se, how high would you go on Cedric Mullins?
Yeah, I don't see any clear weaknesses in the profile. The one projection that we do have, at least in Fangraphs right now, is depth charts. So, and I believe that's applying, a combination of the zips and steamer projection, and then accounting for playing time. But at 658 plate appearances, 261 batting average. So, slightly above average, not necessarily elite, but then 20 home runs and 26 stolen bases. So, I think the one area where maybe you could see a little bit of a drop off is the home runs, the 30 home runs. He did have a 15.5% home run per fly ball rate, which is much higher than his career average and also much higher than the league average, which is a little bit surprising to me. Although in the same sense, he plays in Camden Yards. He had 39 barrels this year at an 8.1% barrels per batted ball event, and his max exit velo was around 110. So it's not like he doesn't have some power. But I believe more in kind of the 20 home runs and then the stolen bases. Again, he's 27. So I see no reason why he can't steal 25 again. So I would prefer to get him obviously where you got him, end of the second round.
Yeah.
But I think there's no doubt that Mullins can be kind of a second round, third round guy next year. I mean, if you think about, a kind of a similar profile would be Bo Bichette, maybe
100%,
where you have the power, where you have the speed, maybe a little less batting average and not as potent of an offense. But the Orioles should get a little bit better. They're generally pretty young. Again, they play in a really good home park, one of the best. And so, I think there's a lot of kind of good things that Cedric Mullins brings. And there was a very clear change in him, ditching the switch hitting and going strictly left-handed. So I don't mind the pick at all.
Yeah, no,
I wouldn't get it there, but I do think he's gonna be really good.
Yeah, I get that's kind of how I feel. Like, I think his floor is actually pretty solid, especially for a first round pick to cover your 5 categories, especially the way steals are so coveted for good reason and so on and so forth. So I think it's good in that regards. I'm not sure I can stomach the pick in the first round. I'm more mid-second to later, as we talked about, but I get it. I think it'll be a fun debate to compare him to Lou Bob this year. I think it's going to get a lot of steam. So that'll be a fun one to see. Tucker's still going to have some things that go ahead of him, but there's some similarities there. But that's a tough comparison. I think Lou Bob's going to be a guy that's going to be kind of around his draft time. As we saw to start round 2, when Scherzer, Lou Bob went second in the round, went Buehler, Trout, and then you did Toby Things with your second pick.
I did do Toby Things. Yeah, I drafted Zach Wheeler with my second pick right there. Wheeler, I like Wheeler a lot. If you look at the projections, depending on which projection system you stick in there, Wheeler's a top 5 guy right now based on the projections. I think, we do need to factor in the NLDH. That's going to go away. So you're probably going to see a little bit of a bump up in the ERA, as you will with, a lot of those NL pitchers. But Wheeler doesn't walk guys. He's striking guys out, and you saw a bump, 1.5% bump in his swinging strike rate. That K- walk rate went all the way up to 23.7%. There's nothing that really you look at and kind of stands out as, there's huge regression coming here. His strand rate was right around his career average. His BABIP was right around his career average. The in-zone contact rate was the best that it's been. His O-swing remained strong. He actually gave up more fly balls this year, which I think was beneficial, honestly. The BABIP has been a little bit of an issue in the past. 306 and 311 in his last 2 years. And so that's that could be a really beneficial thing for him in terms of keeping runners off base, because he doesn't walk guys. So even if he gives up a few more homers, in the grand scheme of things, I think it's a net positive for him. But the volume is key. I mean, 213 innings pitched. He's a workhorse. I think volume is really critical. The one thing I noticed towards the back end of last year was just the teams where I had guys that were volume and Ks. I mean, those leagues, I was way out in front in Ks. And that is where I want to be in my leagues down the stretch, especially with pitching the way it is today. Yep. If you can get that lead in Ks and wins, not to mention the ratios, I think you can have a huge advantage, because then you don't have to focus as much in saves early, and they are available later. I mean, I was able to cobble together 40 to 60 saves on most teams, even though I started out with basically 0. And so having those two guys front ending, especially in a draft and hold where I can't work the wire or stream pitchers, I feel pretty good about that start right there. I wouldn't mind having that start in any draft, I think, moving forward this year.
Innings pitch is a thing I've been focused on quite a bit since the season ended, because, like I said on our last show, strikeouts got me big time. And that's one thing that talking on other shows and just to people in general, even at this conference, that obviously you look at innings pitch and it just makes sense. The more innings pitch, the more chances you have for strikeouts, so on and so forth. And that's been one focus on mine, even on some of my picks I have coming up. It's just like they kind of got the boost based on the workload they had and what the workload could extend possibly to in 2022. And that kind of was like a tiebreaker in certain situations for me. So that'll be interesting to see how that continues to pan out as we keep going through draft season into February and March. After Wheeler, Simeon took Woodruff, and then I, with my second pick 7 in round 2, I went Ozzie Albies. So I was trying a new thing. Usually I try to get a pitcher kind of early, but I waited a couple of rounds. I went Ozzie Albies for the fact that, again, similar to strikeouts and pitching, stolen bases are the thing that is not – you can accumulate it, but not as easy as you think, especially in a draft and hold. It can be a little different unless you just go with a bunch of guys late that you try to plug in and gain some steals, and that can get dicey at times, as we've talked about. So, matching up, I already have Mookie Betts, so I'm hoping for like 15-something steals, 10 to 15 at least, if not more. Now you got Ozzie Albies coming off 30 home runs, 20 stolen bases, a 259 average, 103 runs, 106 RBIs. He pretty much did it all. One of the best second base performances you've seen in a long, long time. And it's not a fluke. He's 24 home runs in his previous 2 full seasons, 14-plus stolen bases in both of those, hit for 260 and 295. So he's, we know what we're getting with Ozzie Albies. A pretty decent average. The protections have him at 273. But the power and the speed is legit, and that's something that's going to continue to be there. Hitting in a very good Braves order. You got Riley, you got Freeman, you got Acuna should be back, at least, if not right out the gate, pretty early in the season. Very, very good lineup around him. He's still super young at a second base position that is deeper this year than it has been in years past, with guys like Trey Turner and Marcus Semien gaining second base eligibility with some other big-time second base talents. What Ozzie Albies continues to do just in his overall profile, just continues to grow. Like his best max EV season this past year, his best barrel rate this past year, his hard hit rate was the best it's been. Even the X stats say, he might have overachieved a little bit, but not a ton. Like he's still playing pretty good baseball. And his strikeout rate only a 17.8%, or no, that's his 18.7%. Massive drop from the small 2020 season. I love Ozzie Albies. There's a lot to like about him. Some might not take him this early. Some might take him earlier, as I found out in some other conversations. But I like the home run, the power speed combo as my second baseman. So I was Ozzie Albies.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say too, I love that pick as well. And I think there's upside. You mentioned lowest batting average that he's had in any season during his career. So there's also average upside there to add to this just phenomenal 5 category profile, or 4 other category profile that he has.
And he could be an interesting one, similar to Seth Mullins, because Albies crushes left-handed pitching, like destroys it.
I know.
And I'm not saying
he should just bat right-handed.
That could be an interesting experiment. That's all I'm saying. Like, if you really look at it, I know righty-righty's different than righty-lefty, so maybe that's could be it. But he's doing something from the right side of the plate. So I'm wondering if that's something he thinks about someday and really could take advantage of. And that could just take it to a whole other level potentially. And that could be wild. After that, we go Machado, DeGrom, Devers, and then blah, blah, blah to keep ending out the round. Going to round 3, my first pick at 3.7. Logan Webb went this round early on. You got Jordan Alvarez, Whit Merrifield. to name a few. We saw Liam Hendricks, closer, goes off the board with the second pick of round 3. That'll be a conversation because then the next closer went right before me, or a couple picks before me, and Josh Hader. But my third pick, with my trend of getting steals, this one might be a little goofy, but I was shocked he was there. Like, I looked over at Simeon.
Oh, it was beautiful, Bubba.
I looked at Simeon because, again, like I told you at the beginning, we just have these papers in front of us, and we're all kind of just like hoping we get things right. There's a guy walking around with a tablet from NFBC, like going through it all. And I go, is he really still on the port? Like, I don't have him crossed off. He's like, yeah, he's there. I'm like, huh. I took Starling Marte with my third pick of the draft. I know he's getting older. I know the power kind of disappeared last year. And he's a free agent, so who knows where he lands. The speed's legit. I think the power comes back a little better next year. Maybe not, but who knows? I wasn't drafting him for the power. I was drafting him for the immense stolen base talents, the run scoring ability. You'd imagine you would hope he goes to a contending team with a good lineup around him. You could hope. But just the fact he fell to the middle of round 3 at pick 3.9, I scooped that up in a hurry because now with Betts, Albies, and Marte, I could pretty much not worry about stolen bases if I didn't want to. Obviously, I have to still because there's no fab, and if one of those guys gets hurt, I need to have backups to fill in some stolen bases. But it definitely took the pressure off of me to focus on stolen bases. So Starling Marte is my third pick. And another thing we've talked about on this show, when I talked to Rob DiPietro, who obviously won a overall draft and hold, he kept plugging into my head, you need a ton of outfielders because that's a position you have to obviously start 5. So if guys start getting hurt, you need to have more backups than you'd have at like first base per se. At that kind of situation, it makes sense if you start breaking it down. So Betts, Albies, Marte is my start, and usually I would have starting pitching by them, but A, Marte fell, and B, there's still a lot of pitching out there. So I kind of just passed on that at that point in time.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty happy with that.
I wanted Marte. I was like, if Marte falls to me here, this is a dream. This is like a dream start, but I didn't quite get there. So
I was shocked. That's all I have to say. After that, Tim Anderson went to Simeon, and then you surprised some people. And looking at this board now, when we get to your next pick, that color needs to be changed. That's all I know.
Yeah. I went with Sal Perez here, and I didn't necessarily want to. This was not necessarily the plan, but maybe it's one of those situations where when you're in a situation where maybe there's a little uncertainty, you kind of fall back on old habits, or you fall back on what is most comfortable. And so I went with Sal Perez. And the thing about Salvi is I believe it. I mean, I don't necessarily believe in 48 home runs every single year, right? But here's a catcher who plays every single day. He plays every single day that he's healthy. And even when he's not, I mean, down the stretch, he was battered up. There was a couple games he left early because of injuries. And, he kept on battling. And he plays every day. He loves to play the game. He hits the ball. He hits the ball hard. The max exit velocity. He crushes it. I mean, he's just an absolutely incredible player. And especially, I mean, even towards the back end of the last year, I mean, he started walking a little bit, he was being a little bit more selective. So I love everything about Sal Perez, and especially in a draft and hold where you can't stream, you can't stream your catchers, right? You're stuck with these guys, right? I'm going to draft, I'll draft another catcher very shortly after this, as everybody will find out. But after that, I'm going to add maybe 1 or 2 catchers the entire draft, right? And probably much later on in the draft. And I don't want to be relying on those guys having to start if one of my guys, gets or you're starting one of those guys that is kind of back end and taking a shot on one of those guys, because if it falls through, it just doesn't work that much. And I think the major thing that I take away from this spot too was there just wasn't a lot of good stolen bases available, honestly. I was going to take probably Tim Anderson if he had fallen there, but Simeon took him. I wanted to grab Marte. But if you look at, let's see if I'm actually right though. So Trevor Story did go afterwards. So there's some potential stolen bases, but again, he's leaving Coors. He was a little bit injured this year. Not a huge fan of that. But after that, for hitters, it's Castellanos and Lindor and Jimenez and Abreu. And I'm trying to read these, and Matt Olson and Aaron Judge, and so there wasn't as many stolen bases, at least in a profile that at that point in the draft, I felt was kind of like a good kind of opportunity cost proposition, I guess. So that's why I went with Salvi. I feel good about it.
Yeah, Salvi's legit. And like we've talked about many times, he's going to get his at-bats. He's going to DH. And there might be a few more catchers that get that DH luxury next year, hopefully. But we know Salvi does. So that's a beautiful thing. You mentioned Story went, and then it was Giovanni Gallegos in the 3rd round to Balspor. He might set the highest ADP of the entire draft season on that one. We'll see. But closers were flying off the board. We'll talk about that probably for big time at the end, but at least throughout this recap. And then you have Giolito, Castellanos, Raisel Iglesias went to start round 4, Lindor, Jimenez, Presley. So he's like the 6th closer already up. This is why as you see my team get built, I just don't have closers because they kept flying and I just wasn't paying the price. But here you come with your 4th pick in the draft, 4.5. And this was like you had the whole draft room giggling and just like, this is amazing. Like just pure laughing, just wow, this happened. And it makes so much sense because it's Toby G. So who was your 4th pick?
Yeah, I went with Justin Tyler Realmuto.
And
Realmuto.
That's how he announced it too, by the way, people.
Yeah, people were like confused when I did it. First, I was like, Justin Tyler. And they're like, what is happening right now? I had to look up what his actual name was on Google before I did that. But yeah, I mean, Realmuto, in a lot of ways, it was a stolen base play, Yep. And I think about it later. I mean, I think there's decent depth at the catcher position this year. And I do like Dalton Varsho, who's going kind of later, who has a relatively similar profile. But with JTR, I think one thing to consider as well is we're probably moving to the NLDH. And as we saw in the shortened season, when the Phillies move to the NLDH, they'll have Realmuto as catcher. They'll give him days off in the DH role. And he can also play some first base, as we saw towards the back end of last season. I think he is going to have dual position eligibility, although that's not that important, right? Because you're going to start him at catcher at something. But, in an off year, he hit like 260. I think he had like 65 runs and 70-something RBIs, 13 stolen bases. It's all around solid production. And I think there's more there. He was beat up from the beginning of the season. If you'll remember, he missed a lot of spring training with a hand injury or something like that, I think. So, I expect kind of a bounce back next year. And I'm interested to see, I thought there would be a discount on JTR, honestly. Like I thought he'd be going around an ADP of like maybe 80 or something. But in all the drafts that I've seen, he's been going in the 4th round, which seems, like a very logical thing. So I was pleased to get those two. Your major concern when you go catchers this early on is a lack of speed. And certainly having maybe projected 13 stolen bases at this point in the draft, I'm not feeling great about that. But I did it, and I had to figure out later on in the draft how to make that up a little bit, especially because I know that I also wanted to add some starting pitching and some closers early on in the draft as well. So,
yeah, but like you said, you locked up your catchers pretty much. We don't have to like focus on going crazy. And like I said, the colors need to change because JTR is purple because he's got first base eligibility. If you really want to get, you can go 3 catchers deep at any one time, Toby. So you got that going. You can go full house. So you in a roundabout way did a full house, but we'll get to that in a minute. The next pick is the guy I was going to take is Lance Lynn. Simeon took Lance Lynn. I was looking at him to be my SP1 in round 4. I was over the moon with it, again, showing to me how deep the pitching landscape was getting. And the reason I wanted Lance Lynn over the guy I did take is I just trust the floor of innings Lance Lynn can bring. Like he is a horse and just goes out there innings, 6+ innings, pretty much every start. Quality starts more often than not. And he's done it year after year, at least for a few years now. So I kind of can believe it. Simeon took him. So I took a guy that I foresaw going in the first 2 rounds, maybe 3 at the latest in every draft this year is what I figured. But he fell to me at 4.7. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I can't pass this up now. And that's Robert Ray. He's my SP1 in my pick in round 4, 193 innings this last year, likely Cy Young winner. Things were great, and we've talked about it, and everyone's talked about it. The thing with Robbie Ray is the walks, because if you look at the strikeout rates, look back to 18 and 19, 2 full seasons, 31.4, 31.5. He was 32.1 this year. But 13.3% walk rate, 11.2% walk rate, down to 6.9 this year. That's why the batting average against was 209 compared to 215, 228, which still is not horrible. But it's just the walks, because now when he gives up a big hit, it just blows the whole thing up. And that's the biggest thing. Now, will there be some regression? Sure. He can't be this good this long, you don't think. But we'll wait and see, because the strikeouts have always been there for Robbie Ray, is what I'm trying to point out in that. It's almost always been a walk issue. That's always been the discussion point when it comes to Robbie Ray. He's going to be a free agent this year. So where does he land? This could come back to bite me in a big way. I'm really hoping that Toronto looks at him and goes, dude, you just won the Cy Young. We're almost in the playoffs. We could really use you here. Like, if they can make something work out, he's going to be 31 years old. The humidor in Toronto would be amazing. Still has those AL East ballparks, but he navigated that pretty well. So we'll wait and see where Robbie Ray ends up. But with the strikeouts that he gives, the innings, because he's 174 innings in 2019, 123 and kind of an up and down 2018 with a 162, 174, the innings floor is there. So I love the innings, love the strikeouts, two things I've talked about plenty and will continue to this entire offseason. Those are going to be there with Robbie Ray. The landing spot will be interesting, but the fact he fell to the middle of round 4, basically, I kind of had to run away with that one and be like, okay, I will definitely take you in round 4 and be okay with that.
I mean, that was a great pick. I mean, I was amazed he was there. And that's shocked. One of the things that I mentioned about like not necessarily wanting to go pocket aces is, I mean, if I would have known that Robbie Ray was going to be there, right, I would have gone in a different direction. But I don't think he'll be there in most drafts, but I think that's a great pick.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I figure he's a second round pick, if not at best, like early third. Like, he's going to be going places. I was shocked. So we'll see how that keeps playing. Like, Logan Webb went way earlier than him. And I love Logan Webb, but I will take Robbie Ray over Logan Webb every single time. I'll take Robbie Ray over Freddie Peralta. Like, but that's me. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. But after Ray, it went Abreu, Olsen, Bieber off the board. That could be an interesting steal if he comes back healthy. That could be really solid for Team 6 on that one. You had Emmanuel Clase, another closer, but Fried going late 4th is outstanding. You got Gossman going there. Judge O'Neill. Like, O'Neill would have been like your first stolen base guy you could have gone with. I understand not taking him, though, because I'm so torn on Tyler O'Neill. Like, to me, he totally outperformed. He's a very good ball player, totally outperformed things this year. So we'll have to wait and see. It goes Riley.
I actually, when I saw that pick go up, I think it was Dave McDonald who made that pick. I was kind of like, that's a direction that I could have gone. Yep. And I wouldn't necessarily mind it because I know there's big swing and miss and all that jazz, but there's also real big batted ball quality. Ooh. And there's real big speed on a team that's going to let him steal. And so I got no problem with Tyler O'Neill that early. I think he's going to be a really good fantasy player for a long time. I
think he gets pushed up more in March, like he goes earlier, because it's the average is the only concern, but the power speed is going to be there. He's in the middle in the order. He's good to go. Like, if you look at his StatCast page, and they talked about him a lot on the hitter panel, and I was like searching stuff while they were talking about him, and things check out. That's all I got to say. So I'll have to wait and see there. But then
I mean, he went 34-15 in 567 plate appearances, right? Yeah. So he wasn't even healthy the full season.
Yeah, and so like I don't know how like last 2 months of the year it felt like. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't to criticize any specific pick, but like, I don't know how you go Matt Olson over him, or I don't know how you go even Aaron Judge over him, honestly, because there's a little bit more track record, but there's also other concerns like injury wise, with Judge, for instance, and those 15 stolen bases, they could be 20. I mean, he could be a 40-20, legit 40-20 guy. And he's still, what is he? He's 26. So there's still growth there, potentially.
Yeah, when they were talking about him on the panel, that's what got me kind of digging in on him some more, because I was just curious. Something I was going to do anyways, like what was like this compared to previous seasons, especially StatCast wise, because it's always been the deal with Tyler O'Neill. It's like he hits the ball very hard. He does this. Like, okay, that's great. Like, we know guys like Matt Olson hits the ball hard. Sure. We've also seen him hit 200 and just like totally choke it away for you. But they kept talking about his speed. So, okay, let me check out this speed. And if you go on Savant, like they have the percentile rankings, and like in 2020, he had a rough year, just period, like everything. In 2021, he's right across the board pretty much, except for K percentage, walk percentage, and whiffs. One thing that's been sustainable his entire career, 97th, 98th, 99th, 98th percentile in speed in all 4 seasons he's been in baseball. The dude is fast, and he's not losing. Like, you look at certain pages, I can't remember who I was looking at earlier on that same day. I started looking at some different guys that were steals, but kind of losing steals. And they were at one time like 98, then it was like 88. And then they were blue and like 50% after like the 5th year. So a lot of guys regress. Tyler O'Neill is literally just fast. So that's one thing about him is if worst comes to worst, say the batting average regresses, he still probably hits you 25 homers. He probably still steals you 20 bags. Like, he's still going to be pretty darn solid, like you said. So I agree with you, and that's why I think he goes higher in drafts as we continue to go.
Too.
Riley, Flaherty, Goldie.
I mean, a good comp, right, is Robert,
big time,
or Luis Robert, right? Like,
Heck,
there's not a lot different between those two profiles.
Let's go back. Like, this is only this is October still, and obviously we'll have a lot of discussions to be had. A fun one to bookmark could be, let's look at the 2022 numbers for Cedric Mullins and Tyler O'Neill. I could see Tyler O'Neill outperforming Cedric Mullins, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, that's one of those, it's like, if you don't feel comfortable taking Mullins early, but you're getting your player pool lined out, go circle, like, I want to try to get O'Neill in round 3 instead of Mullins in round 1 or 2. You try to get the same similar profile with potential upside. So it's an angle. Long ways to go till that happens, but something to start keeping in the back of your mind is that's why I wanted to talk about this draft, is we can kind of start seeing things play out, and it'll obviously change, but it's interesting to start getting your mind working towards 2022.
Yeah, and not to belabor Tyler O'Neill here, but one thing I noticed just in looking at his rolling average graphs is the plate discipline has improved dramatically, because I think we still have 2019 kind of in our heads and before that, and when he struggled. But man, the plate discipline has been on a downward trajectory in terms of his O swing.
Yep. Now
for a full season, essentially. And so he's swinging at pitches inside the zone. So even if the contact isn't great, even if he maintains that 75%, but he is swinging more and more at pitches inside the zone.
Yep.
Then that's great. I mean, that's a profile, right? That's Bryce Harper, essentially.
And it makes sense because you look at, like, his ground ball rate dropped, but his fly ball and his line drive went up because he's swinging at better pitches, in theory, as you're saying, in the zone. So that's a plus. Like, that's what I was looking at. I'm sitting there going, okay, so how'd this change? How'd this change? A lot of it, for the most part, was kind of within range of each other. But it was like the where he was targeting his damage, like you said, basically in a roundabout way, that was impressive. So he's developing as a hitter. He's still super young. So I like these going down rabbit holes on guys. So, like, literally, if we only do like 7 rounds today, I don't mind coming back and doing more later.
We can come back next week
because this is kind of fun, kind of talking about different players that kind of stand out. So I got no problem skipping around for that. And
one thing to remember too is, I think of all the divisions in baseball next year, I think the NL Central is going to be the worst.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you just think about the Pirates and Cubs, just those two teams, the pitching staffs that they're going to throw out there. It's going to be rough. You know, the Reds, obviously, you know, the pitching staff is pretty good, but it's still a really good hitter's ballpark. I mean, the Cardinals pitching staff will not be that great either. You know, they do have the benefit of the ballpark. The Brewers will obviously be really, really good, you know, pitching wise, but it's just, you know, of all the divisions that I think about, you know, I think that's the one where the most teams are still either behind or taking a step back. Whereas in the AL Central, you know, yeah, there's not going to be that great of teams, but you're going to have the White Sox. I think the Tigers are going to be much improved. You know, the Twins, I think, had a rough year just in general, but I think they have the pieces there, you know, especially with some of the rookies, you know, like Kirilloff, if he's healthy and he can play next year. Buxton, if he can stay healthy, a big if, obviously. You know, the Guardians, Cleveland, you know, they may struggle, you know, offensively. So I still think the Central are the worst divisions probably, but I think the NL Central is definitely one where I'll be looking at picking up some starting pitchers, although my team that you're looking at now will not factor that in because I haven't. Those are the types of things, right, that later on in drafts you're able to take in all those considerations as you make decisions on players, and we just didn't necessarily have that option right now.
Well, yeah, and just the little thing, even going back to Tyler O'Neill again, is the comments that just thinking through this with you. It's like, okay, well, maybe Starling Marte is getting older. And obviously, I probably still would have taken him 100 times out of 100 times there. But what if I say screw it and I go and get, you know, my boy Giolito or I take Robbie Ray right there. And then I go get Tyler O'Neill in round 4. Or I take Tyler O'Neill in round 3 instead of Starling Marte. Like, those are little things that can be interesting to dive into some more inside of make or break situations as we get going there. But round 5.
And the projections love Tyler O'Neill as well. Yes. They love it.
Round 5, we got Austin Riley, who I think is going to be an interesting talking point all season long because the dude's legit, but still some holes in that swing. But you got Flaherty, Goldie, Springer, Frankie Montas in the middle of round 5. That's just Luis Castillo, then another closer in Edwin Diaz. We got JD Martinez, and then I went with another outfielder. This one I wasn't 100% on, but I kept looking at how much pitching was out there. I'm like, okay, well, I'll get another power speed guy that at least chip away at the steals. And all in all, the season started out very, very slow for Randy Rosarino. Like a lot of people kind of early victory lap and why'd you take him so early to people and this, that, and the other. Well, if you just believe in the back of the baseball card, he finished at 274 with 20 homers, 20 stolen bases, 94 runs at 89 RBIs. Like, still put together a pretty solid season. Grabbing him around 5 now is intriguing. The strikeout rate is still very, very high at 28%, but the walk rate grew a bit too, which was nice. But he's still hitting the ball hard. Barrel rate at 8.2% is not too bad. 42% hard hit rate. He way outperformed his X stats, though. I'm going to say that much. Way outperformed his X stats. So that'll be something to keep in mind. But I'm also taking him at round 5 instead of like round 2, maybe 3 last year. So he kind of fell a bit, which was nice to me. And even if the certain stats drop, I still think the homers and steals will be legit. So I'm going Randy Rosarino just because I had it in my head and maybe I overthought things. I want to make sure I really lock up outfield. I want to lock up my outfield because that was one of my biggest things in my NFBC 50s, my draft and holds that I was doing. Outfield really, if you start getting a couple of guys injured, I was having like Luis Arias playing the outfield. I was having sometimes Jeff McNeil, and we know how bad that was. It was rough at times to fill out your outfield. And I want to be able to, at least healthy, have these guys that are studs that I don't have to worry about. And then later in the draft, I can go get a Luis Arias to play him at second base or to play him at middle infielder, where I feel a lot better mentally putting them in that position. Like in reality, I guess it shouldn't matter, but it fits out better for me in my head to do stupid things like that. But yeah, Rosarino is my 5th pick in the draft.
Nice.
Jordan Romano, closer for another closer. I just it's so many of them. But then you took one here, and like I don't blame you because they're flying. And when we go through the closers I got, it might be 3 podcasts from now, but they're down there. I don't blame you for your pick. So who was your 5th pick?
Yeah, so I wanted a closer. I mean, when I went into the 3rd round, I was thinking if Hendricks falls to me or Hader falls to me in the 3rd round, then I will go that direction. But it didn't happen. And so I knew I wanted to get a closer. They were flying off the board quickly. I did want to get Romano. And so Simeone grabbed him right before me. And I grabbed Kenley Jansen. And, yes, he's going to be a free agent, but I don't think there's any way he doesn't re-sign with the Dodgers. I mean, if you think about it, so far he's been lights out during this postseason. He was lights out this year. I mean, he was incredibly good, a 2.22 ERA, a 104 WHIP, 86 strikeouts in 69 innings, 38 saves. The K- walk was down a little bit to 18%, but the swinging strike rate was still there. Lucky with the BABIP for sure, but he doesn't give up home runs. I think the walk rate will fall back down. It was a little bit too high, so that'll compensate a little bit for the BABIP. So, I mean, I just love everything, and I think he re-signs with the Dodgers. There's no reason why he doesn't sign like a 2-year, $40 million contract with them, right? They have the money. They have a sure thing with him. He's generally a lifelong Dodger. I think he was traded early on in his career, but like, there's no reason that doesn't happen. Yeah. I don't see. And so I think he signs there, and that's the best place to be a closer in baseball. So yeah. I'll take him here, and with the, whatever the chance is, 15%, 10% that he signs elsewhere and isn't the closer, I just can't see that happening, for the life of me. So I think I'm good with it.
Yeah, he's like the 9th or 10th closer taken in this draft. That's outstanding. I remember I drafted him last year and people thought it was crazy. And early in the season, people had their reasons, but he's the dude. He's still so good. Like you mentioned, what he's doing in the postseason right now. I think he struck out 12 guys in 17 plate appearances or something. Like he's ridiculous, which it's just great to see. And I'm 100% with you. Like we were at the Greg Jewett and Doug Dennis relief pitcher closers little talk before lunch, before the draft. That was the last kind of session. And we're all sitting around the table. And Jansen came up because mainly it's a Q&A for the most part. And Jansen came up because people were worried about, he's a free agent. Do we go get Blake Trinan? Do we get Corey Knebel? Things like that. And a lot of us were pretty much on the same page, like you just said, is he's going to be a Dodger, guys. He's going to take a team-friendly deal. This is what they do. Like Kershaw did it. Jansen's already kind of done it the first time. Like he got the 2 or 3 year deal. It was pretty friendly. He's older. He knows like this is the place for him. They're going to let him close at least probably 70% of the games, which he did this year, it felt like, and still had a great year because it is the Dodgers who are in 100-plus games again next year. So, yeah, Jansen's fine. People that talk down on Jansen just blow me away. Like, could anything happen? Sure. But, like, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, pretty safe, pretty solid pick. So, no problem with that at all. Stanton and then Alberto Mondesi goes here in round 5, Toby. He's a guy that I just can't bring myself to take. Yes, if he's healthy, we know the stories behind him. He can't stay healthy. They won't guarantee he can platoon. He's only got third base eligibility to start out the season. So where do you stand on that about the Mondesi, who we know, if he plays every day, has just insane talents? We're just not seeing it these days.
Yeah, I mean, going here at this point in the draft, I mean, I would have no problem grabbing him in a regular draft, honestly. The injury concerns are major, but I mean, you get half a season out of him. I mean, look at what he did. He had 136 plate appearances, 6 home runs, 15 stolen bases.
That's pretty crazy.
I mean, it's unbelievable production. You get half a season of that, right? So you multiply that by 2, you're talking about getting 30 stolen bases and 12 home runs, 38 runs, 34 RBI in half a season. And then he's on the IL and you replace him with somebody who hits for power. And all of a sudden you have a 30-30 guy on your team from the fifth round draft slot. So these are the types of things I think that happen in these later drafts. And obviously I think he's going to fall to later in drafts this year for sure. I think there's no doubt about that, but you know, 5th round, it's a win-win proposition. And I think the third base eligibility is a huge boon. I mean, third base is shallow this year. You're barely going to get any stolen bases from that position, generally speaking. So I really think it's a really great pick right there. So I'm down with that.
Yeah, for every reason that we love J-Ram at third base, Mondesi could be that dude, if not better. So that is pretty crazy to see, at least close to that guy. And I think it's even better in a draft and hold to take Mondesi because you don't have to sit there and debate dropping him or something the whole time. Just put him on your bench. You have no choice. And then you bring him back when you don't have to spend fab to get him back type thing. Like he's on your team regardless. You know, make sure you have another third base, but maybe a little sooner than you normally would. You don't have to force it, but it makes it interesting. So he'll be a fun one to debate. And yeah, because if he's healthy, the dude's like a second round, first round talent. Like we saw last year, I think he broke Steamer if he was healthy. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. Chris Sale coming off the board. I kind of like that at that point in the draft too. You got Will Smith. Then coming back in round 6. We'll do round 6 and we'll call it a day on this one. We got Musgrove, Aroldis Chapman, another close. Like I'm telling you, like the way Toby said, like I was looking to take, Hendricks in round 3. Every time after my pick, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take one of these closers, and then boom, boom, gone. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to force my hand on the next guy, and then I'm like, okay, I'll make my pick, and then I'll take one of these closers, boom, boom, gone. I probably should just force my hand. Is what it came down to, but it was crazy. Correa, Barrios, and then you are on the clock. Who was your 6th round pick?
Yeah, I ended up going with Jazz Chisholm.
Love that pick.
Yeah, Chisholm had a great year last year. He's obviously a young dude. I'm sitting here looking at his 40-game rolling average. He had a great year last year. There's obviously some batting average issues, or potential issues with Chisholm. But in 507 plate appearances, he hit 18 home runs. He stole 23 bases. The counting stats were there as well. We talk about how, we have concerns about his overall, kind of profile. But when you take a look, it's actually not that bad. Like he's known as a free swinger. His O swing is 32.5% throughout his career, so slightly worse than league average. And then we also think of him as just kind of a wild swinger who doesn't make a lot of contact, but that's also not really true. He's slightly below average in terms of his in-zone contact. He's slightly below average in his overall contact. And then I think because of the speed and the batted ball quality that he makes, he's always going to have above league average BABIP as well. And so I think you're looking at a perennial 2020 guy with the possibility of, a 2030 season, potentially, especially if the Marlins lineup can improve, just slightly this year. But the StatCast metrics, 112 max exit velo. He had 28 barrels, 8.6% barrel rate. So, better than league average as well there. So for a guy who has speed, who's hitting at the top of the lineup, I think he's he's just lefty, but, I like to pick a lot. He has second. He has shortstop, multi-positional eligibility. I just think at this spot in the draft, if he plays to what he did last year, he's still solid. If he gets a full season in and he plays with what he's capable of, you're talking about a guy who can return you second round value. So I like that a lot, especially on a team that really needed stolen bases pretty badly.
Yeah, it's a great pick for what you said, especially needing stolen bases. I almost took him instead of Rosarino, but it drilled in my stupid head. I want outfielders. That was what I kept telling myself. And I love Chapman. I took him, not Chapman, it's Chisholm. I took him in a previous mock draft or whatever we were doing a couple weeks ago, not the one on Monday night. I'm a huge fan. And what I compare him to is if he does, like you said, perform to his abilities that we think he can, he's a Bubba light. Like, he's got that potential. I really believe he does. Maybe not average per se as much, but the power speed he brings to the table, I'm 100% on board. He could look like kind of mirroring a potential Bichette type thing. Like, I'm a big Chisholm fan, so I love that pick. That's a guy, as we keep getting ready for draft season, I'm going to make a point to kind of like a Tyler O'Neill with the Chisholm, highlighted on my list to be like, okay, this is a guy I need to try to make a point to get. Like, how far do I have to reach to not be crazy reaching to get this guy? They're going to be on my guy list, hopefully, type thing. All right. After Chisholm went off the board, Charlie Morton went. That was an intriguing one, and it dropped my SP2 to me, and I was surprised. But again, pitching's deep. But Dylan Cease is a guy I'm going to go to, and it's a combination of things. Is he took a big step forward this year. During the pitching panel, I was just going over different leaderboards, and he kept kind of showing up on things. I'm like, okay, well, because there were certain times I'm like, this isn't true, whatever. Near 32% K rate, 9.6% walk rate, 22.3% K to walk rate, was one of the best in baseball this year. That's where he stood out on that list, because not as many guys as you think were over 20% K to walk, and he was 22.3, so that was outstanding. He still threw for over 160 innings, which was great to see. So hopefully he can take that next step in a very, very good White Sox rotation that we know can produce some good things. Plus, he'll have a good offense behind him. So I'm a big fan of Dylan Cease. He continues to develop, and he's got the prospect pedigree that we hoped he could be. So in round 6, as my SP2, getting a guy like Dylan Cease for, again, strikeout upside, massive potential innings, eating upside. Cease is a guy that I don't see going this late in drafts come March, but I will gladly take him as an SP2 in round 6. So I was pretty pumped on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that's the major difference that I noticed between this draft and some of the other ones that I saw is there wasn't a lot of value for starting pitching. I mean, I think where Cease and Montas and other guys like that were going before, like around pick 100, was way too late. I mean, these guys are legit. I mean, what you said about Cease, I think Cease is fantastic. If you look at what he did in the second half as well, over his last 10 games, he had an 80% in-zone contact rate, so really good, more than 5% below league average. His strikeout rate was 36%. Yep. His walk rate was at 10%. So he still walks a decent number of guys, but I'll take a 26% K- walk rate out of a guy that I'm getting, especially where you got him in the draft. The O swing at 33%, really strong there. The swinging strike rate at about 15% as well. I think there's no reason. I mean, I think Cease here is fantastic. I wouldn't be surprised if he's going in the 4th round, maybe even the 3rd round, as we get closer to those bigger drafts.
I think once more pieces get written about his season where people realize just how good he was, I think it's going to be interesting, because I mentioned his season long 22.3% K to walk. That's 10th best in baseball. And I said not many go over 20. There's only 16 guys in baseball that were over 20% K to walk. And that might not stand out to a lot of people, but if you want to go back, I'm going to be a broken record. You're going to hate me. Strikeouts. This is a big thing. So, like, you look at the names on this leaderboard, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. Check. Okay. Dylan Cease is amazing. So, a big fan of his. I know I will never get him in round 6 probably ever again. So, I'll enjoy it while I can. Rounding out round 6, you had Cruz, Bellinger. Polanco, Pete Alonso, Nolan Arenado, Alek Manoah. That's an interesting. That's probably close to about right for him. Seager, and which is funny because in the piece of paper we had, he went like in round 2, but round 6 here, which is much more appropriate to me. And then Jose Altuve, I thought was a heck of we gave Dave McDonald a lot of joke. We joked with Dave McDonald a lot because he had the turn and he clocked out. Like, he gets two clocks basically back to back. He clocked out on the first clock every time, just like clocked out. And so we were razzing him, but he made some really good picks. I'll give him that much. So anything else to round out round 6 that stood out to you? Like I said, we'll come back and keep going on this draft in the coming weeks.
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of it, but a really interesting draft, really sharp group of drafters, I thought. And you know, a lot of the draft went as I thought it should, as opposed to how I thought it would, which was a little disappointing because, you know, those guys like Cease, who you grabbed, I was hoping that maybe I could get him coming around the next round just based on the other drafts that I had seen. But as per usual, you know, draft the guys that you want or that you need. Get your guys. And, you know, as the drafts become closer to March and as they become a little bit more, you know, meaningful, because obviously this is a meaningful draft, but we weren't necessarily able to prep that much. And, you know, it's not a draft for money. Like the winner gets a subscription to Baseball HQ, which is a fantastic prize, but, you know, it isn't like a high stakes draft as some of the ones that we will be doing will be later on.
Yeah, we were 100% doing this to kind of get our feet wet and see where the things stand, talk about it like this, kind of get our brains going in the direction, and it's doing that very well. So, and it was fun to get back in a room like with just a lot of sharp people. You, like I said, not even just the analysts, a lot of sharp people across the board. There were not a ton of like interesting picks. Like they all kind of made sense. So it was good to see. Got a couple listener questions, and then we'll head on out of here for the night. Michael Simeone, Mr. SP Streamer himself, who was sandwiched between the two of us, and I got to sit next to him, so that's a key part in this question, as you guys will find out.
For sure.
What's one lesson you learned coming out of this draft, besides the fact, this is to you, Toby, that you were sitting behind two of the best-looking men in the draft room?
For sure. I mean, that was certainly difficult and distracting, you know. But what were some of the lessons? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, like what was a lesson learned like that you from the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lesson learned for me in the draft was that I need to prep more. But I think it's a unique draft, and the landscape is different from year to year. And so I think my approach is probably going to be different than it has been in years past because of that. And so I think it was helpful to kind of be in this situation and see who went where, and to think through where I was comfortable and where I wasn't, to think about how I might approach the draft differently if it were to happen again, even with the same players going, you know, in the spots where they did, where my roster construction might be a little bit more to my liking. At least the initial roster construction. I like the team generally that I drafted, but in the first few rounds, I think things could have gone a little differently. So,
yeah, I think it's pretty similar. Like one thing I said is, as we keep going through, starting pitching is so deep in this to me. It could be fool's gold, but there's a lot, even as we continue to go on, that just guys that are SP4s, SP5s that I thought would have gone sooner. So that stood out. Relief pitching, I don't know if it's going to be that crazy going in the drafts, but it could be. It could be, because people might literally be traumatized from this past season. So
absolutely,
that was one where I'm going to have to really do a lot of like just even best balls and stuff just to get in my head like, this is where I got to take this guy, or it's not happening. Because I didn't, like I said already, I didn't have that for the first like 12 guys that got taken. I just couldn't do it. And then trying to put my stuff together in closers has already been a nightmare. So that's going to be a massive deficit on my team. So we'll see how that plays out. Dave Peters, the yellow, he has a question, one for you, one for me, kind of a two-parter here, but he put one pitcher for each of us, basically a pitcher we took, and we haven't gone over these guys yet. Yeah, we haven't gone over these guys all yet, but Toby, Michael Kopech, he's a real interesting, and obviously drafting him there is with the assumption he starts. For sure, he can make that draft spot look very conservative. How much do you think they let him loose in 2022?
Yeah, I think he's really good. 27.7% K- walk rate, 14% swinging strike. He threw 70 innings this past year, 103 strikeouts, 3.50 ERA, 1.13 WHIP. You know, all just really strong numbers. I mean, maybe a little bit of control issues, but he was right around league average. So, and really dominant inside the zone as well. So I just don't, honestly, I have no idea why they wouldn't put him into the rotation. Unless they have some sort of questions about his durability, or they have some sort of question about his, you know, ability to go through the order, you know, 3 times. But they got Dallas Keuchel in that rotation, right? Yeah, exactly. And then they got Rodon, who's a free agent. I think Keuchel's gone. I think his contract is up. Is that right?
I think so.
So yeah. I think there's just a natural slot for him to. Let me just check.
On paper, they have no reason not to let him loose unless there's something structurally wrong with his arm to not let him loose.
So there's oh no, so he's through 2022.
They might find a way to get rid of that.
Yeah, I mean, he was really bad. He's really bad at virtually everything.
They didn't even keep him on the postseason roster.
Yeah, and so I see a difficult seeing Keuchel come back and be part of that rotation. And it's not like he's that expensive. I mean, he signed a 3-year, $55 million deal, which sounds like a ton, but a 1-year contract that's lower than the qualifying offer. Maybe they can they can have him as a long relief guy or something like that, an innings eater, something. But I think Kopech is so good. He's shown himself to be so good. There's no reason why they shouldn't throw him in that rotation and give him a shot. And if he's in that rotation, and let's say he throws 150 innings, right? I don't know what the logical next step after, 70 innings is, but it feels like 140 is doable. And if you get 140 innings of relatively similar production, I think in the 13th round, that's going to be fantastic value. And even in a draft and hold, if he's pitching in, middle relief and pitching like he did this year, where he pitches like 2 innings, and throws 70 innings with the numbers that he did, it's probably a comparable pick for a 13th rounder. Mm-hmm. And he's really good. So I think I'm pleased with kind of that as an upside play in round 13. With maybe there's a couple more stable options available.
No, I don't hate it at all. He's got might not have the safest of floors potentially. I think he will, but his ceiling's going to be huge. So I'm with you on that one. The question for me, he says, I picked Cease before Darvish. Who would have thought that this past March? But I certainly agree. What are the chances he buttons up his command a bit more and he's a 2nd or 3rd rounder in 2023? I think Toby and I thought he's potentially a 3rd or 4th rounder this year. So 2nd rounder for sure, because even, he still walked 9.6% this past year. Toby mentioned like the second half was still about 10%. He's been about 10 to 11% guy for like 4 straight years. This was the lowest walk rate he's had since 2000, or his lowest of his career, but technically about 2018 in single A. It's his lowest walk rate in the bigs. I think he's still so young. He's still developing things. You keep sticking him with guys like Giolito and Lynn and that pitching, the pitching coach, I forget his name now, but they have something really strong going there. It's one of those things with his youth. They're going to teach him more like location and doing this and that. I think the kid's going to be very, very good. Like we saw a massive jump this year. The tools are there. The pitch mix is there. Like literally, if he just flicks it on like Robbie Ray did, imagine what a guy like Dylan Cease could do. Now that's like what Robbie Ray did is kind of a not once in a lifetime thing, but a very rare thing to do. But if Cease even like cuts that in half, maybe he goes from 9.6 to like 7 even. That could be tremendous. So, and Toby already mentioned earlier the AL Central. Again, it's a better division than you think, but still, the Tigers are going to be good. You can still navigate the Tigers. You can still navigate them. Cleveland, the pitching is something we like. The hitting, maybe not. So there's going to be holes in that division for Cease to feast on. So he legit could be a 2nd or 3rd rounder in 2023. 100% agree with that. So we'll wait and see. Or maybe he takes a step back. Maybe the controls are a real issue. Like, how many years did we go in saying Robbie Ray, this is the year, and he just started walking like 13 and 14% of guys. Here's like cutting him. Anything's possible in baseball, but I do believe Cease is heading in the right direction for sure.
And one thing I'll say about Darvish is he was god awful that second half of the season. But if you look at the underlying skills for Darvish, they did get worse, right? So his in-zone contact was 85%, which is right around league average. So definitely went worse. His walk percentage increased as well. This is over his last 10 games of the season, 7.8%, but that's still lower than league average and around league average for a starter. His swinging strike rate dropped to 10.7%, but his K rate was still 30%. So he still had a 22.2% K minus walk rate. His O swing definitely fell a lot and was worse than league average. But if my memory serves me correctly, his home run per fly ball rate was over 20% for much of the second half. So he was giving up home runs at an alarmingly high clip. Whether or not that's something that he'll continue to do, I'm not sure. And then during that second half, he also had a spike in his BABIP. At one point in time, over 10 games of the second half, he was at a 326 BABIP during that period of time, which ties for the highest in the last 3 years. And then his strand rate check this out. His strand rate over his last 10 games was 58%.
Oh, come on. Yeah.
So that means that almost half of the guys that got on base against him kind of scored. So Darvish, where you got him, I mean, I think there's potential for there to be, so that to be a really good pick. And I think those are the hard ones where we have immediately in the front of our minds this recency bias where we're like, man, he got lit up. And there looked like no way that was going to stop happening. But Darvish is a smart pitcher, and he has generally had good command during his career. And he strikes out a lot of guys. And so I could definitely see him coming back and returning some value where you got him for sure.
Yeah. We'll talk about him for sure next week, but that was my 7th round pick. And it was the strikeouts again. You mentioned the underlying stats, and like no way am I comparing him to Aaron Nola, but everything everybody says about Aaron Nola's underlying stats, you got to give Darvish a little bit of the same treatment. Like, still, he was worse than Nola. I'm not going to say what, but is he 5 rounds worse than Aaron Nola? Probably not. Like, I guess he was injured a lot in the second half. Post-sticky stuff was a lot that took place. You give me an off season with him learning how to pitch without the sticky stuff and all the get healthy with the arm as an SP4 on my team. I'm like okay with that in round 7, where it's the luxury like we talked about with Ramon Marquez last year. If you take him at a certain point, now you don't have to feel like you have to start him because he's an ace for you every week. Like, I can select when and where I want to start you Darvish now because I have other guys I can switch in and out with him. Like, if it's one week where I'm kind of worried about his matchups, throw another closer in there for all I care. Like, we could have all kinds of things. So that's kind of another, like, I'm not taking him in the second round, or like in my head, which still shouldn't be the case. But you think about it, it's like, I got to start him. He's my ace. Start your aces. Now you're not really stuck in that mold per se. So that's part of the process as well that we'll get into next week. Ryan Roof had a great question. I'm going to save it for the next one when we get closer to finishing because it's kind of a all-encompassing draft question. So, Ryan, not forgetting you. But Brian Seymour has our last question of the show, and he asks, closers you are 100% comfortable drafting right now.
Closers that I'm 100% comfortable drafting right now. Hendricks, Hader, Gallegos, Iglesias, Diaz, Romano, Jansen.
Yep.
I think that's it.
Yeah, Diaz was one I looked up a couple of times because I was like, kind of like, like you didn't mention Aroldis Chapman. You kind of not comfortable with him right now?
Yeah,
I understand if you're not.
He was been so up and down, and he was really bad the second half and really struggled. So I just don't want to. It's not that I'm not necessarily comfortable with him, but where he's going in drafts, I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. I thought about Presley. Yeah. I should probably include him on that list. Although, is he a free agent?
No, he's there. He's
there. Maybe I'd add Presley to that. I feel like I've been tainted by a few blow-ups that he's had, but he's been really good as well. And then I can't remember whether I said Clase or not.
I was just about to say Clase, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's really good. My biggest concern with him was the lack of Ks and the walks, and he seemed to really solve both of those issues. And I see the Guardians going back to him next year for sure, just because I think he earned it. But I wouldn't want to. I'm not as confident enough in that at this point in time to draft him where he's going. Whereas, for instance, I got Will Smith, I think a couple rounds later, and I feel like Will Smith had probably the worst ratios year that he's had in a while, but the skills were still really great. And I think he's Atlanta's closer next year. So I feel really good about that pick as well. So actually I'd add Will Smith to that equation as well.
Yeah, I'd say that the first list you mentioned off, like the 8 or 9 guys, 100% on board with you there. I think Presley's very close. I'm still I think he starts out as the guy. You should be comfortable with him. They still got Graveman. They still got a couple guys there. So it's interesting, but it should be Presley. I don't see why it wouldn't be. So if you want to, if you do like a 1A list and then it's like 1B, I'd have like Presley, Clase, and Chapman right there where you should feel good about them, but there's reasons for slight concern, I should say. So you got like 7, 8, or 9 possibly really locked in. I'm good going to right now. 3 or 4. Will Smith, I'm still always tainted with, but I get what you're saying, so I can't argue it. He's definitely no Brad Hand, so that's good. But that'll be fun, and we'll have some more fun ones to talk about next week because Camilo Duvall was a very popular topic of conversation, and some other guys that Now you're starting to get into the waters where it's a little murkier. So it gets interesting because it gets murky quick. So we'll talk about all that. But we'll wrap it up there, Toby. Any final thoughts? We went through the first 6 rounds. Obviously, we'll go a lot quicker, I'd imagine, on the next ones. But those first 6 rounds, a lot of interesting kind of, I guess, philosophies or just where guys landed that stood out kind of out of nowhere type thing. So pretty interesting stuff to me.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Really enjoyed this going over this draft. I'm glad we're going in a little bit more depth, maybe, because I think there's a lot of just interesting points that I'm not even realizing until I start hearing the names and I start thinking about the players and different comps and stuff like that. So it's been really enjoyable. I'm looking forward to getting through the next chunk of rounds in the next one.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do that for you guys in the coming weeks. And again, if you have more questions, keep them coming. We'll keep asking them. Like with Ryan's, we will get to that one, I promise. It just fits better for later in the show. So if you have all-encompassing draft questions, bring them. We'll save them for the end. If you have certain specific questions, keep them coming as well. As it's 2022 draft prep season, we'll go harder in a little bit, but we're kind of just go through this draft and get our mind keep going in the right direction because it is pretty cool to kind of get going to 2022 because as Toby and I know, especially Toby, he's even more on it than I am. Drafts are starting soon, Toby. So like in a month, I think these draft and holds will be up on NFBC. So
yeah, I think they said November 6th or November 7th is the date that NFBC is going to switch on over to
baseball
to switch on over the draft and holds and over to baseball. So it should be interesting for sure.
Yeah, so that's coming right around the corner, but we will have you covered with all that fun stuff and things. So check out Toby on Twitter at BatFlipCrazy. I'm at Pediatric. This was episode 99 of Bubba on the BatFlip. Catch you guys next time.